Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fourth installment of Let's Talk Science, UC Riverside's College of Natural and Agricultural Sciences virtual event series. My name is Debron Rabb, Director of Development for CNAS, and I want to thank you for joining us for this panel discussion. Please note that only speakers will be heard or seen during today's webinar, and if any questions come to mind, please submit them in the chat box, and they will be answered at the end of the discussion. Today, CNAS Dean Kathryn Uhrich will serve as the host of the discussion between our three accomplished UCR alumni panelists. Dean Uhrich oversees a research and teaching enterprise comprising nearly 1,000 faculty, staff, and researchers, and approximately 8,000 undergraduate and graduate students in 13 academic departments. Dean Uhrich also oversees 30,000 acres of natural reserves and 1,000 acres of agricultural operations land, as well as the UCR Botanic Gardens. Thank you again, and without further ado, I'll turn it over to you, Dean Uhrich.
Thank you, Debron. And thanks in advance to our distinguished alumni, Amit, Greg, and Pouya. Thank you for joining me, and thanks to all of the rest of the group for joining us today. So as Debron pointed out, this is the fourth virtual event in our series that we host quarterly to highlight outstanding alumni and engage in discussions about a range of topics focused on the sciences. So I've been really looking forward to this conversation, discussing innovation and leadership in the healthcare industry, and know that you will enjoy this event with our accomplished UCR alumni. So we have three folks who are joining us today. We have with us Amit Munshi. Amit is the President, Chief Executive Officer, and Director of Arena Pharmaceuticals. He has more than 30 years of global biopharmaceutical industry experience in executive management, business development, product development, and portfolio management. Thank you for joining us, Amit. Next, we have Greg Melendez. Greg is Vice President and a leader in RGP's healthcare practice focused on selling, developing, and delivering high-valued strategic services. He is a healthcare executive who has spent over 30 years as an executive and strategic advisor at some of the largest and most prestigious healthcare organizations in America. Thank you for joining us, Greg. And then last but not least, we have Pouya Afshar. He is a triple board certified, serves as an assistant professor as a medicine at the University of California, San Diego for 7 years before transitioning into his own healthcare startup. He is currently the CEO of Presidium Health, which he founded in 2015 with a focus on managing our most medically complex and underserved patients with a tech-enabled in-home model of care. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, Pouya. So thank you so much again, you guys, today for your time. To lead us off, I have a couple questions for you, and I'm going to start with Amit. So to kick things off, I'd like to hear from this group about how you all met and how UCR played a role in where you are today.
Oh boy. We can only provide some.
I know.
And only provide
okay,
some
wait,
of the
gotta
details.
keep it clean.
Can only provide some of the details. Greg, Pouya, and I were all fraternity brothers at UCR, along with a group of just amazing human beings, and that span industry, that span public service, and it's been an incredible journey. And we've all stayed in touch. 30 whatever years later, we stopped counting at 30, and it's been actually incredible to reconnect. Pouya and I reconnected a few years back around Presidium Health, and it's just an incredible group of human beings that want to do amazing things in the world. And I wouldn't be where I am today without UCR, for sure.
Thank you, Amit. So Greg, anything you want to add, and perhaps a bit how UCR played a role in where you are today?
Yeah, going back to what Amit was saying, we met as fraternity brothers, and we've kept in touch. UC Riverside was very important in my development. I was a transfer student coming out of a junior college. So I got partial college experience, but even that impact helped propel me to where I am today. So very, with the people I've met, the caring folks like Amit and my other close friends on UC Riverside have gotten me to where I am today.
Thank you, Greg. And Pouya,
Yeah, I mean, it's really echoing what both gentlemen said. First of all, I'm very proud to say that I've got two of my fraternity brothers on this phone call that are very successful in their careers, and not just career-wise. I think as people, they've really inspired me to sort of do what I do, to help out the community and to sort of build services that ultimately leave a legacy for us. In terms of UCR, I was a 16-year-old high school graduate starting at UCR. So I was obviously very young at that time, and I credit my social interactions and social network before Facebook and all these other World Wide Web services that are out there that bring us together. And it was that relationship amongst friends that really led to where I am today.
Great. Well, thank you.
Of course.
So before we started, we were chatting about the impact of COVID and on our subsequent fields. So perhaps starting with Greg this time, given the many challenges brought on by this pandemic, can you describe how your organization has been able to innovate during these times?
Yeah, COVID has the impact on society and to work life, and what that means in our society now is I think fundamentally altered from what it was. We are now a remote society working at our homes or someplace other than an office space and getting jobs done. I think that change is going to be permanent, especially in healthcare. Healthcare is a very old traditional firm. You know, I like to say you wear the blue suit and the red tie type organizations you go into because you're dealing with patients. Butts and seats were always the norm. Now that's changed completely. Productivity did not take a hit when people moved to home as people thought it was going to occur. Collaboration did not take a hit as we thought it was going to occur. And in some cases it enhanced. So, you know, in our organization, we're adapting to this remote by providing the flexibility to companies like Amit's on being able to flex the workforce as needed in order to get the strategic initiative done, either through helping roll out pharmaceuticals through clinical trials, helping staff finance departments with just-in-time staff, or doing systems implementation or project work to keep the place running. So I think that model, that is this flexibility that is now permeating through the mindset of employees in light of the extremely intense job market that's out there. It's a seller's market. You're, you know, with the right skill sets, you can basically ask for the moon right now. I think that is here to stay.
So Greg, I realize, I think it might be helpful for this audience if you shared this before, just a little bit about what you do. Because if in our conversation before, you said you've been working from home for quite a long time, which was surprising to me. So you haven't seen much of a change. So please share.
Yeah, so I've spent about half of my career at provider organizations working as an executive at Cedars, at Kaiser, at USC Keck and others. And then about just over half of my career as a consultant. And as a consultant, working out of the home is no big deal. You know, I was fretting at one point where I actually had to go back to an office because I didn't have a 4-day work week. Because usually at Fridays you did administrative work, which is like me saying I'm going fishing with Amit. You know, it was a 4-day week. So yeah, that aspect didn't really change it. So I'm fortunate enough to have a dedicated space to I work, because I've had that for 30 years. So just the technology's gotten better with all of our, you know, whether it's Teams or Zoom or video or whatever service you're using. It's amazing how fast they've evolved over such a short period of time.
Thank you, Greg. Pouya, maybe I'm going to start with you. If you can, I was hearing from Amit that what your background is. I'd love to hear from you what you're doing now, and then I'll ask you about innovation. But let's start with.
Sure. Yeah, as far as a career standpoint, I started off UCR, got my biology degree, and took a detour, went into the world of business, got my MBA, and took another detour at the age of 31 and went back to medical school, thinking that being a physician is my ultimate career path, and it was. After I started working as a physician for a few years, realized that there was a lot of inefficiencies, let's say, in the system, particularly in the hospital world that I was used to working in, and started to sort of wander outside of that institutionalized healthcare space and see what happens when patients go home, go to nursing facilities. And over time, I realized there were a lot of patients that were essentially being cycled through the system from home to emergency department, to the hospital, to the nursing home over and over again. And on a whim, I just started doing some house calls way before it was fashionable, before sort of COVID made it more of a standard process. And over time, we figured out how to do the things that I was doing in the hospital, x-rays, labs, medications, and so forth. And after a while, I realized there was a valuable service, not just to our patients, but to the system as a whole, to minimize a lot of the dependency and cost and risk that especially underserved patients that didn't have any other resources would end up in our hospital systems and get subjected to a lot of things that they shouldn't be subjected to. So that sort of gave the idea to our company. And, of course, well before COVID, this was our foundation, was going to patients' houses and providing care at home. And in the post-COVID world, it's now become a standard of sorts. And so we were fortunate enough. Of course, the pandemic was not something we wanted, but in the midst of this horrible pandemic, we had an opportunity to take our services and really accelerate and grow as the need accelerated.
So following up on that, so it sounds like with the pandemic, you didn't really need to innovate so much because you were already being innovative in terms of how you're delivering your healthcare. But the challenge for you was how to expand it.
Yeah,
or how to implement
of course there were
it?
challenges. Yeah, there were challenges like with any company. Half of our staff is in the office providing support for our field members. So we had to scramble last minute. In fact, it was Friday the 13th, March 2020, when we gave an email out to our team. You have the choice of coming back to work on Monday, or you can stay at home, and everyone stayed at home, and we haven't looked back since. The other half of our team that's in the field, of course, they kept doing what they were doing with the proper precautions and so forth. I think the challenge has been, really not a challenge, but I guess an opportunity, is that there are a lot more people now in our space. So perhaps there's more competition, which I think is a good thing. It promotes more innovation. It forces us to be more innovative, more nimble, and to look for the next sort of opportunity to make our processes better.
Great, thank you.
Of course.
So Amit, thank you. Amit, again, perhaps you could share a little bit about what your company does and
Yeah, sure.
transitioning how the pandemic may have changed what you're doing in your company.
Yeah, so we're a biopharmaceutical company. We're development stage. We have 4 drugs and about now 11 indications. We have ongoing about 25 global trials in 45 countries, 600 plus clinical sites, and in about 150 non-clinical studies. So a pretty significant scale in terms of building out what we think will eventually be a very robust pharmaceutical company. It's very interesting to hear what Greg and Pouya are saying, and there's a kind of a little bit of a common theme, which is the trends pre-COVID have all accelerated, right? So things that were already happening have already accelerated. We had half our management team on the East Coast, half our management team on the West Coast. And so we were kind of already used to working this way, but it's accelerated the entire process. But I think there's maybe even a broader theme here, which is it's not just our companies that have had to flex. It's almost like there's been a complete transformation and change in the kinds of things that are valued in the marketplace. So for example, we're using Greg's company to create some flexibility in our finance as we scale. Why? Because the labor market's tight. And we are utilizing in-home services for things like EKGs for some of our clinical studies. Why? Because patients don't want to go into the office. So, to Pouya's business model. So some of these things, there's some really nice overlaps and some common themes about how structurally the world has changed. And I think what's going to really be impactful for students going into the workforce is to understand that, the assumptions that they had 2 years ago or 3 years ago about what their careers were going to look like are going to be very, very different. They're going to be working from home like Greg does. They're going to be working in the field. They're going to be like me, traveling. It's just going to feel very different in terms of what perhaps they've envisioned before and what it's going to look like going forward. I can't imagine us all going back in time. It just won't happen.
Thank you. So actually one comment, you guys have a lot of common themes, but clearly the connection between science and business clearly is a theme that runs deep. So you're operating a space that you're looking at science, you're looking at business. Typically, you would not think that there'd be much of an overlap. I'm guessing most young people coming into UCR is probably thinking they're two disparate notions, but yet it's actually, you've engaged those and you have a pretty strong interface. So how would you say in your experience that interface between science and business and that space that you operate, has it changed over the years? Is it something more acceptable to do now? Or is that, because it's, I'll just say from my perspective, you guys each took it and ran in very different ways, yet it's very common. So maybe I'm going to start with Pouya this time. How has the interface between science and business evolved?
Yeah, so if we want, in my world, I guess I define it as the digital healthcare space, and we look at how things have evolved in that realm, in that industry. Last year was the first year where we crossed $10 billion of venture capital and private equity funding into the digital healthcare space. It was a sort of a landmark year. In the first 9 months of this year, we've surpassed 20 billion.
Wow.
So what's happened is the industry, the business world has looked at healthcare as sort of the next frontier. This is where a lot of the inefficiencies exist. And now with COVID on the rise and COVID accelerating innovation, there's been more of a catalyst to drive more innovation into this very inefficient, high risk, high cost environment that we're in. And I don't see this stopping anytime soon. I think we're just at the tip of the iceberg. With a lot of this funding, you're going to see companies start to sort of rise to the top and prove themselves as leaders. You know, there's obviously a lot of money being thrown out there, and I don't think all these companies will be able to succeed in the near future, but the amount of money going in will allow certain companies to rise to the top. Of course, the Apples, the Amazons of the world will be there, but other smaller companies that are nimble and able to sort of provide new innovation these other companies haven't provided will have a space in this new digital healthcare world that we're living in.
So thank you. I saw Greg is nodding a lot. Greg,
Yeah, you know,
interface.
It's fascinating when you think about it from a student perspective. When I was in college at UC Riverside, I never thought I would be where I am today. I didn't see it. And, you know, I graduated with a business degree, but yet I ran clinical departments. I ran research labs. I've been, you know, in very high levels of hospital operations without the clinical background. So this intersection that you can achieve is really only in your own mind. As I like to say, business is business and healthcare is a business. Even if it's a nonprofit, it still has to run like a business. And a lot of people don't understand that about it. They think it's mysterious. It's, you know, there's something scary about healthcare. No, it's a business like everything else, except we deal with life and death, where Sony Pictures deals with, you know, do they make a buck on the movie they put out? And, you know, the intersection of digital and healthcare is huge, as Pouya was mentioning, and we're seeing it a lot. I just closed a fairly sizable engagement with a health system in LA, a large health system in LA, to basically rethink their entire patient experience and how that is dealt with, and bringing in kind of almost like how casinos deal with their customers. Depending on what type of customer you are, you get a customized pathway that better suits your need, along the lines of Pouya, where you go after what the patient needs, not what you want to give them, to more customize the healthcare. And it's purely in this digital space, kind of like creating the Amazon approach. I know this is crass, but the Amazon approach to healthcare. You get it customized to your own mode that's most comfortable for you.
Well, it sounds crass, but it's something that I think a lot more of us can relate to in the last 18 months than we ever thought we would before.
Yeah. And that really is starting to take off. Healthcare has always talked about patient centricity, but it really hasn't started taking off until we were forced to have it take off, and COVID accelerated it dramatically. And so that convergence is, you know, Pouya's doing it. I'm seeing it in my client base, you know, Amit's seeing it in his. So this truly is, as we say, it's a hot market for employment. It's a hot market for patients. Patients have the ability now to pick and choose what they want. So.
Thank you. Amit, what about you? Again, the question is about the interface between science and business and how that's evolved over the years.
Yeah, you know, when we talk about students in the science space, and you and I have had a chance to have these conversations, and I think I said this the last time around, which is I think it's imperative for even folks going in the science fields to get a fundamental grounding in core business aspects, how to read a P&L, how to read a balance sheet, how does a P&L balance sheet relate to each other, how to read an income statement, really simple things that, Pouya, for example, had the advantage of doing his whole career backward, doing the MBA first and then going to medical school. But most physicians come out of medical school and really have very little understanding of the business environment they're going into. So whether they're a hospitalist or whether they decide to start their own practice, which almost nobody does anymore, or they join a large integrated delivery system, the detailed understanding of how they operate in that business environment is absolutely imperative. And unfortunately for us, the education systems are still very siloed, right? So if you're going to medical school, you're going to medical school. You're not learning some of these other skills that go along with it. We see this in terms of we hire people out of medical school to work in clinical trials or work in safety and have very little understanding of how an organization works or how a business works or heck, how a stock option plan works, right? And when I get stock options, what do I do with them? And so I think one of the things that we're going to find over the next decade is there's going to be a lot more interdisciplinary learning, right? Like Greg had to learn how a lab works or how a hospital works, and Pouya had to learn how to build a business from scratch. And I think there's going to be just a ton more of that going on because I see it happening in our world and in the world of our lead drugs in the world of ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease. One in 3 patients is now treated by one of 20 integrated delivery systems in the country. 1 in 3. So if you don't, you can talk to the physician all you want. You can be a scientist. You can have a PharmD. You can have a PhD. The problem is if you can't understand how that system works and how to communicate to that system, to deal with the business executives in the system, to Greg's point about this being a business now, I think you fall flat on your face. So I think there's going to be a mandate to have much more interdisciplinary thinking, even in the science fields, because things are getting monetized that before weren't getting monetized. Someone posted a question around the role of wearables and the Apple Watch, and now the fact that you can do a single lead EKG on an Apple Watch. Those things are going to change the way we deliver care and are going to have business implications. And that trend is not going to stop. It's just going to keep going. And the net impact of all that is exactly where Greg was going, which is the patient's going to be in charge.
Well, thank you. So I was just thinking my question so far has really been focusing on kind of operational or management. And I'd like to think perhaps bring it up to another level and focus on leadership. So you guys are all business leaders as well as science leaders. So I'm going to start with Greg on this one. So what is your current definition of leadership and how has that changed or transformed over the years?
Yeah, well, when I got out of Riverside, I didn't know what leadership was because I was still trying to figure out which way was up. And I say that purposely because no matter where you start, doesn't mean that's where you're going to end. So one thing that I found over my years is a leader is a good listener, first and foremost, really understanding before they react. So thoughtful reaction to situations or thoughtful proaction in the light of evidence. So, and that really, leaders also aren't really, if you ever go to the executive suite of a major corporation, it's always quiet. It's always hushed tones. There's no yelling. There's no running around like crazy people. And that's also that inner strength to be able to take adversity or a complex situation and deal with it logically and methodically. Pouya, starting his business, had to go through, I'm sure, sleepless nights of what to do, but he did it in a very calm, organized fashion. So, so I think that's really the key points is being able to listen, understand before reaction, and then react in a constructive manner.
Wow, I hadn't heard leadership and listening linked. Writing this down because I like that a lot. Pouya, leadership. What is your definition of leadership, and how has it changed over the years?
again, I think we all draw on our own personal experiences. And I think for me, working in a big hospital system, an academic hospital system, I was sort of one of many thousands of people. And in that environment, I didn't feel like I had an opportunity to make an impact, to change society, to really leave a legacy. And that's what ultimately allowed me to have the inspiration to leave that environment, start my own company. And in that manner, once that happened, it was my responsibility as a leader to teach and perhaps promote this awareness to other people in our company, to be inspired by what we're doing, and to have that passion that I shared, that I learned through being in an inefficient hospital system, to teach our employees that there's an opportunity here for them as individuals to make a difference in this very complicated healthcare space. Secondly, I've had several of our employees come to us and say, you're one of the few companies that actually truly genuinely cares about our personal and professional growth. We've had probably, we're only about 50 employees, but over the years, we've had at least 20 or 30 employees that have gone on to higher education, promotions to other companies. And we're proud of that. While we may lose those employees, the amount of effort that we put towards giving our employees an opportunity to become more well-versed, either through education, through learning about things like Six Sigma, processes, clinical skills, that's all stuff that we do not because it's our job, but because it's our culture. And I think those two combinations, inspiration and growth, are two hallmarks of a good leader.
Oh, thank you.
Of course.
And Amit, leadership. How would you define leadership?
Yeah, I'll give you maybe a slightly different answer, but something that's really happened over the last 24 months that I think has changed leadership at the C-suite level. I've had this conversation with lots of other folks in similar positions as me. For so long, we were the architects, right? We were the strategy, the company culture, all that's the things that are traditionally associated with leadership. And I'd say there's a whole nother dimension over the last 2 years. We've all heard about the Great Resignation. A disproportionate number of people are leaving the workforce. Mm-hmm. There's a premium on retaining talent. And part of that, coming back to Greg's point about listening, is you're hearing the employees ask for something different than they've asked for different. They're asking for more of a connection to a cause, right? Which Pouya clearly has in his company, for example. They're asking for being part of something bigger, not bigger in terms of size, but bigger in terms of purpose. And they're asking for the leaders to be vocal about things that we've never had to talk about before, whether it's diversity and inclusion, whether it's gender diversity, whether it's gender diversity on our board, whether it's something called ESG, environmental, social, and governance ratings that we're all rated on as public companies. These are things that we weren't thinking about 2 years ago. And we spend a disproportionate amount of time being therapists to our staff, listening to what people need, social architects, more involved in the community, more playing a role in terms of what the company is going to do in its proximal communities as a whole. The George Floyd incident, for example, opened up a can of worms that nobody really was prepared to talk about, and we had to talk about it. We needed to talk about it, and those kinds of things elevate the conversation, and so it becomes very. The role goes from being very disassociated to being very associated, and your personal beliefs come into play, your personal thoughts, feelings, your personal experiences come into play. That authenticity has to come into play. It's a whole nother level that's come into play over the last 2 years that, I sort of joke that some days I feel like a CEO, some days I feel like the church pastor. And it's this weird dichotomy that's happened over the last 2 years. But back to Greg's point, it's what our employees are demanding of us. And so we have to be mindful about how we discuss these topics and what the company footprint looks like. And Pouya hit the nail on the head. People are looking for more growth. They're looking for the company to give them more. There's more demanded of the enterprise and of leaders in the enterprise. So that's been a very difficult transformation, because historically we've not had to deal with any of these things.
So you guys, this is fascinating. I mean, because it was, I'm trying to figure out how to process this. So Greg, listening, Pouya, inspiration and growth, Amit, you're talking about a connection to a cause. I mean, they all sound like leadership is being more human, more humane, which is not what I would have thought a leader was. A leader is somebody who knows all these technical skills, and I'd say more hard skills. And just listening to you guys talk, who are just phenomenally successful in so many different ways. Leadership is going to be defined very differently now. And it sounds like clearly it's an outcome of COVID, unfortunately, but it sounds like it's a really wonderful outcome. Unexpected, but wonderful. Wow. So
it's a difficult transformation because we're not trained that way, right?
Yeah.
We're trained, right? And so, you know, you can manage a P&L, you can get the profitability, you can manage all this stuff, but if you're not connecting with the people, and if you're not listening carefully, you're not developing growth opportunities, you're not addressing social issues, you're not thinking about diversity and inclusion, all these things that we weren't really trained to do. And if you're not doing that, you'll have an exodus of people. They'll go to the next company looking for that again, it's not a hard thing. It's something soft. It's something visceral. So
yeah. I think you're humanizing. The humanizing of leadership is a correct analogy going on. You know, people want that connection, whether it's to a cause or to a person. And if you're not able to make the connection, then I think in my mind, then you're not being a leader. And that's the dimension that no one teaches us. Or at least,
yeah, and I'll add one more piece just to riff off of what Greg's saying. Authenticity has become more important than ever before, right? So it's okay. I get on calls with 400 people on a Zoom call in my company, and I routinely talk about I don't know the answer. That we're on this journey together. We're going to figure it out together. Like, we're going to put out some ideas, and it might work, it might not work, and you know, before you were expected to have all the answers, and turns out nobody really has all the answers. We're all kind of learning as we go along, and it's kind of weird to say, you know, 30 years in the business and I'm still learning how to figure out how to do this job. But the world's changed, and the environment's changed, and expectations are changed. Investor expectations have changed with things like ESG, and so it's okay to say, I don't know. We're working on it. We're trying to get better. And I think that authenticity really plays an important role here.
Authenticity. I'm taking notes here. I'm learning a lot. And I'm also tracking. So I have a few more questions, and I see that we have some that are posted to the audience are posting. I want to get back to perhaps UCR a little bit, you know, thinking back in your career, or even your time at UCR, what would you do over and why? And maybe I'll start with Pouya on this one.
If I had to look back in time, I think I would have made more of a direct effort to be even more well-rounded. What do I mean by that? Perhaps not choosing a biology degree before I went into medical school, and, you know, learning about history or music or art or something else beyond what I was going to ultimately be confined to. And again, this goes back to what Amit said, and it's sort of a sign of the world as we know it. Everyone's in a silo. And I think in order to breed innovation and to create new ideas, you have to be someone that's explored outside of your walls, of your silos, because in that world, you don't really have an opportunity to think freely. And so I wish I would have studied something other than the science track that I was destined to sort of go into, and look at something else. I wish I was more musically inclined. I'm very jealous of people that can pick up an instrument and appreciate music on a level that I can't.
Well, okay. So as the CNAS Dean, I need to say, I'll just for the record say, so I'll go to start with the science, but that doesn't mean you can't be more well-rounded.
So you do both, ultimately, right? I mean, if
both.
I wanted to go to medical school, I would have majored in, let's say, music, but had the minor in chemistry or science or pre-med or whatever. So they have to go together. Absolutely. No, but that's
Yeah.
actually the right, it's the right answer. It's also the practical answer because that's really what has to happen. But I just didn't take any of those other courses. I was so ingrained in sciences that I think looking back, I would have liked to have had additional outside experience. And the other part of it is beyond just the going to school and going through the sort of processes of didactic learning, taking an opportunity to take advantage of the services that universities offer to go abroad and go to other places, meet other people, other cultures, other languages. I did that a little bit, and what little time I spent in that, traveling abroad and learning other cultures, I wish I would have done even more of that. That would have also had more of an impact on who I am and perhaps rounded me off even better.
Well, from my perspective, you look pretty well rounded already, but thank you.
Thank you
for sharing that.
Of course.
Amit, with you.
Yeah, I think one of the things that UCR provided and provides today is exposure to all kinds of different people, right? The diversity of UCR, the fundamental diversity of UCR. And I don't mean diversity just in color or gender or sexual orientation. I mean diversity in socioeconomic upbringing and diversity of first generation kids. And we've talked about this extensively. And, here we are, Greg, Pouya, and myself. And, I'm an immigrant. Greg grew up, well, I'll let Greg tell me how he grew up. Pouya's folks are immigrants. And many of our friends are first generation kids, even back then. This is, how many ever years ago, our first generation kids, they became police officers and teachers and firefighters. And these folks are still our closest friends. And that richness and diversity of the people you're around, I just think makes you just a better human being. And back to the point about authenticity and being able to connect to people, if you go to an elite school on the East Coast, whose name might start, with the letter H, you're going to be surrounded by a very homogeneous group of people. You just are. And I've encountered lots of those folks over the years. And I really think that the diversity and richness of experience helps you connect to people later in life. And I think that's one of the most wonderful things about UCR. It's why I keep coming back and trying to help out and in any way I can, because I think that shapes who we are as people and leaders.
Thank you, Amit. Okay, Greg, if you had a do-over.
If I had a do-over, I would have helped Pouya be that more well-rounded person.
and teach Amit how to fish.
Yes, exactly. And teach Amit how to fish, or at least tell better fish stories. Yeah. So as Amit implied, I grew up from an immigrant father from Mexico, and I grew up on welfare. And I was a transfer student into UC Riverside on heavy financial aid, and I had to work on campus in order to pay for school. But yet, it provided, as Amit implied, a diversity of thought is what I'd like to say, the exposure to different ideas and to the possibility of what if, that really allowed me to break outside of what I thought I was going to do in the world, or what I was going to be in the world. I went into Riverside when I transferred as one thought process. I came out a completely different thought process. And that manifested my career as I said earlier, I'm a business guy who's done a bunch of clinical and research in biomedical. Typically that doesn't happen, but the walls are your own self-imposed. You, the one who you limit yourself, no one else. So Pouya went for it and he started his empire, and I'm extremely proud of him. Amit controls the world, and luckily he throws a few breadcrumbs my way. So, it's amazing. If I could do it over, I guess the only other thing I would do is probably pay more attention to some classes that I didn't pay that great of attention to, because I was having too much fun with these guys. No, it was a blast. I had a great time. Loved it.
Well, I mean, clearly it's paid off. I mean, it's very clear that you enjoy each other's company and you're learning a lot from each other in so many different ways. And it's not just about science. It's about the human part and the social and the connection part.
Well, I think you brought up something really good. It's the continuous learning. I guess that's the one part about leadership I don't know if we talked about here, is a good leader is always learning. As Amit said, he's learning new things. Pouya is creating a whole industry. So, continuous learning. If you stop learning, you stop growing, you stop the possibility. And I think that's what Riverside instilled, at least in me.
Okay, so Greg, now that you brought up, that's an interesting question. So how do you keep learning in your field? Because it's such a diverse field. So how do you focus on learning?
Actually, it takes a lot of effort to stay up to date. And I'm sure the gentleman on the call can agree with me that you actually have to focus on it so you don't fall behind what's happening in your industry. Clients hire me to come with ideas. I sell ideas in my brain. That's all I sell. I don't make anything. I sell an idea to a company and they say, I like that idea. Here's a couple $1 million, go do it. So the only way to do that is continuously be up to date on what's happening in the world and what's happening in industry with what you're focused on, bringing those ideas back. And that goes back to just being inquisitive, curious, constantly, and loving what you do. I think for the three of us, not to speak for the other two gentlemen, but I love what I do. I have a blast doing it. And, if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life.
That's true.
Yeah.
Amit, so how do you keep learning?
One of the real advantages of COVID is that it's actually freed up time to learn.
It has.
Right, and stay in touch, because Greg and I, we talk all the time. We're traveling all the time, and it's really difficult. You're running through an airport, you're staying at a hotel, and now that all that extra wasted energy is time I can spend reading another paper. Right, it's a time I can spend thinking about. We're doing a lot of work with a whole bunch of major payers across the country where we're grabbing their data under confidentiality. And we're analyzing the data using an artificial intelligence system, and machine learning. I mean, those were just words to me 2 years ago. And we're doing things that I never thought we would do as a pharma company in terms of trying to help health plans understand where their costs are, where patients are undertreated, and in ways that we've never envisioned before. And a lot of that's come out of, we've all had time to think a little bit more, right? To have a little bit more silence. And I remember a couple of years back, Greg, you and I were like, "Oh, you're in Alaska, I'm here." Zipping all over the place, and just having a little bit of white space to think, to learn, to read, to connect with experts in the field, to think about what's next, look around the corner. I think COVID's made a huge impact in that, and I'd say that's been for me personally, that's been one of the greatest learnings of the last, is just having that little bit of white space to think and to read, to understand what's going on in the world, new trends, new practices. I learned a lot from Pouya, learning about his business and where things are going on the ground in healthcare. It's been absolutely fascinating. And I couldn't agree with you more, Greg. Just this idea of constantly being curious, because things are changing at a pace that it's even faster than 2 years ago, and it's probably doubled in the rate of change. Has continued to double over the last couple of years. It's mind blowing.
Thank you, Amit. Pouya, yours.
Yeah.
How do you keep learning?
Yeah, I think I would first step back and say, in order to keep learning, you have to control the one commodity which I now appreciate more than anything else in this life, which is time. So, when I was in my 20s, 30s, before I was married, it was easy to sort of do whatever I wanted to, whenever I wanted to. And with a family, a wife, a startup healthcare company, and tons of responsibilities, you start to sort of condense your time into buckets, and you want to make sure that you preserve those buckets for family, for children, for work, for your health, and for learning. And I think what I've done is just make sure that I commit a certain amount of time each day. So for example, I have a routine. For one period of time, I was driving a gas-powered car, and it required me to pay attention and focus on the road ahead. And I would spend 30, 40 minutes on the road each way back and forth to work. I realized if I bought an electric car that has self-driving features, I could get stuff done in the car during my commute, like today. So I find ways to add more time to my very busy schedule and utilize every minute of every day for things like learning. And in terms of the learning aspect of it, you know, we're in obviously a digital age, and there's so many outlets for us to get information from. I've learned through talking to my friends and other colleagues in the industry, ask them what they listen to, and what podcasts, what audiobooks they like to listen to. And I found those few sort of podcasts that capture my attention, my interest, that are interesting and allow me to learn. So every morning as I'm driving to work in my Tesla, I put it on auto drive, drink my coffee and listen. And so it's a lot of it's electronic, just doing it without picking up a book and doing it the old fashioned way. That's what works for me. And I found the outlets that, again, are appealing to my interests and my industry, and some things that are outside my industry, just what we talked about earlier. It's not always about healthcare and finance and digital healthcare innovations, also looking about other industries outside of what I do, and reading about companies that do non-healthcare related stuff. I think that allows me to take some of those practices and perhaps find a way to be inspired by what somebody else does in a totally different industry and apply it to what we do in healthcare.
Great. Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you, folks. And I'm looking at the time. So we have about 12 minutes left. I have one more question, but I think I'll ask it after perhaps some of the audience questions. Looks like Amit is starting screen sharing somehow.
No, I'm not. Yeah.
Way to go.
Yeah, turn it off. I've got a new, speaking of learning, I've got a new Zoom screen, which I'm trying to figure out how to use. So sorry about that.
Maybe in the middle of an interview is not the time. That's like what I would do, press buttons.
Oh, that's great.
Okay. Actually, there's one that I really thought. Can you talk about the opportunities students and recent alumni would have to get into your industry, which might be kind of difficult because you guys are doing some very new things, but I would like to hear your perspectives. So maybe this time I'll start with Amit. Opportunities for students and alumni, UCR folks, of getting into your industry.
Yeah, so our industry encompasses so many different functions, so many different areas. You know, everything from human resource functions to finance functions to manufacturing functions. For folks in CNAS with a science background, there's a broad range of things to go after. And I'll start from the back and work forward. So number one is never underestimate the complexity of manufacturing. We are the fourth most regulated industry in the world. We're right below the U.S. waterway. Actually, we're right above the U.S. waterways and right below oil and natural gas and how we're regulated. So our entire manufacturing process is incredibly regulated from the first time we make a pill to the time we commercialize a drug. And that relates back to how we do clinical trials, et cetera. So the manufacturing piece, there's a tremendous amount of opportunity in areas like quality assurance and in areas like, just working on drug substance or drug product. Folks with chemistry backgrounds or biology backgrounds are routinely being hired into these kinds of roles. And they're usually not in the companies themselves of our size. They're usually in contract manufacturers. And there's 3 or 4 dozen of them around the world that are just, and Greg's probably worked for all of them. And they're enormous in scale and they're always hiring. So I would really don't underestimate the world of manufacturing, because one of the areas that we're learning through COVID is supply chain is a problem, right? So we're learning more and more about all the vulnerabilities in our supply chain. My predictions over the next 5 to 10 years, supply chain and manufacturing is going to explode. The amount of venture dollars that are going into supply chain and manufacturing tech startups is exploding. And it's because we're learning about the really hard touch points that we have, or the pinch points rather, I meant to say, in manufacturing. So keep an eye on that piece of it. Clinical development, always a huge area. Commercialization of drugs, always a huge area. The work with payers, the work we do with all the big managed care organizations, another big area. So pay attention how the healthcare system's evolving, and not just pharmaceuticals, medical devices, robotics, all the different areas that are happening there. And pay attention to manufacturing. I think there's going to be a tremendous explosion there.
Great. Thank you, Amit. So Greg, for you, opportunities for alumni or students to get into your industry.
Yeah. I think Amit was really, I want to pick up on one of the themes you said, supply chain. So there's an old saying that amateurs focus on weapons, professionals focus on supply chain when it comes to war. Because you can't win a war without supplies.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what weapons you have. And everything, I made a statement earlier that healthcare is a business, and businesses, it's just a business and any other business. And so try not to get caught up in the mystique of whatever it is you're looking at. Boil it down to its nuts and bolts. And that's how I've approached my career in healthcare. Is just because it's healthcare doesn't mean a business guy can't do it or get a different thought process than traditionally looked. So there are all kinds of opportunity out there waiting to be created, and in areas you wouldn't think of. So Google is coming on strong in healthcare. Apple's coming on strong in healthcare. You know, there are startups all over the place that you would never think of as a traditional healthcare play, but because of the digitization and the rethink that were occurring before COVID and now with COVID and the new normal that's coming about, the jobs that are here today, some of those aren't going to be here tomorrow. There's going to be something we can't even think of yet. Creativity and thought of what you want to do, and taking what Pouya did and saying, hey, there's got to be a better way to do this, and taking the risk. So don't be afraid to go after, if you want to get into healthcare or healthcare consulting or anything, there are so many ways in. Just do a little bit of research, figure out exactly, where you want to kind of focus, and then go after it with a gusto. Use your network. I think, actually, here's an interesting thought on UC Riverside. I don't think I've ever had to apply for a job in my entire career. It's all been through networking and UCR connections. So keep that in mind, students.
All right. So we're going to disseminate your contact information to everybody.
I'm here.
Well, actually, supply chain. I'm just going to pull, and then I'll talk to Pouya. Yeah, supply chain. Who knew that supply chain was, until the toilet paper crisis hit? Who knew how important it was?
Yeah, and I'll give you an example as it relates to CNAS. 95% of starting materials for all drugs are made in China. Even all the generics that are made in India buy starting materials from China. We're recognizing that that's a pinch point. And so companies are now scaling up to start doing raw materials in Europe, raw materials in the US, drug substance manufacturing, drug product manufacturing. We're recognizing these pinch points, and it starts with toilet paper, and then you realize China's making 95% of all our starting materials. And that's just, in our world, that's one example of where I see this changing over the next 10 years. It has to change. And that's going to require a whole new set of skills, going to open up all new opportunities, and all new, literally bringing industry back to the US. I think it's going to be absolutely critical. It's a national security issue.
Yeah, I've heard that too. So Pouya, opportunity. Thank you, Amit. Opportunities for folks to get into your industry.
Yeah, I think, again, in this world of digital healthcare, as you're studying the sciences and taking your chemistry, organic chemistry, biology, and so forth, take time to also look at other classes, the business classes, the computer science courses, just at least an introductory start to some of those other areas of discipline that are now starting to not just merge, but become embedded in this world of healthcare. And this is obviously the world that I know. I can't speak to all the intricacies of the pharmaceutical world or other science industries, but in healthcare specifically, I think to be able to take somebody who has broad experience as a clinician, as a business person, as someone well-versed in coding and technology and how to automate, in my mind, that's the kind of ideal person I would want in my company. As we're at the point now where we're taking a lot of our processes that we've done by sort of an analog manner, and we're trying to automate it and trying to speak to our developers and our tech team about what we do. There's a bit of a gap there. And I know what I want as a clinician, as a business leader of the company. The tech team sort of sees the world very differently. And I sometimes wish I had more of their language in my brain to be able to articulate the things that we need. And it takes more time to do that. So as a student, if you have the opportunity, some of those elective courses that are out there, branch off, take something you would never even think of taking to sort of push your brain, push your mind, and open your world to other things that you may not have been exposed to. And now is the time as this young student, that's when you want to do it.
So I think we hit a lot of this already, and I'm looking at the clock. We only have a few minutes left. So maybe we'll just do a quick round, starting with Amit. What piece of advice would you give to a graduate right now?
Well, there's a couple of good questions on here, which maybe I'll take a stab at and weave that
Sure.
in. What was the best class you took at UCR? It was funny. It was love this. It was Bob Dylan in America, and it was viewing the 20th century American history through the lens of Bob Dylan through the 60s and 70s and through his music. I just, to Pouya's point, it was a mind-blowing class to understand social revolution as it was occurring in the 60s and 70s through the lens of Bob Dylan's lyrics. I thought it was the coolest class ever. And I'm still a big Bob Dylan fan, so.
There you go. Advice. Greg, piece of advice that you would give?
Yeah, don't let you be your biggest impediment. Don't let your insecurities, don't let your questioning. Nobody's going to say no harder than you. You got to go for it. Because there's only one life and you got to make the most of it. And if you're not where you need to be, then make it happen. Focus. That's it.
Thank you, Greg. Pouya, piece of advice.
Yeah, piece of advice, keep an open mind. To everyone's point here, I think if you would have asked me 30 years ago that I'd be doing what I am doing today, I would have told you you're absolutely crazy and there's no way I'd be in this position. Keep an open mind. Make sure you prioritize your life and find an industry that truly you're passionate about. And that's not easy to do, but if you can sort of keep your eye on what gets you motivated, what gets you excited, and never lose sight of that. Don't ever settle into a job that's just a job that's paying the bills. Take the risk of wanting to chase your dreams and do something that may in the beginning may not be as fruitful, but in the long run, it's that passion play that's going to get you success.
Well, you guys, thank you so much. Time went by really quickly. It was inspiring, a chance to listen, to really think about things, and just bringing in the humanity into what you do. Just really want to appreciate. Thank you on behalf of everybody. Really appreciate this. So basically for everything that you do for CNAS and for UCR, to our attendees, thank you for joining us, and to the UCR students and alumni. We look forward to hearing from you guys in the future about your successes and featuring each one of you at one of our next Let's Talk Science events. And so thank you again for attending this, and we hope you'll join us for the next one, which will be next quarter. So thank you again for your time and energy. This is one of the best ever. Amit, Greg, and Pouya, you guys are amazing. So such an inspiration. Thank you.